And my plan for what we should do today is that we should start by looking at the quiz that you did for today. And after that, I have prepared 2 examples of the things that I interpreted as a little bit tricky when I looked at what you answered on the quiz. But there are 2 examples. The first one is about condition controlled loops, and the second one is about count controlled loops. And after that, it's time for you guys to work on the tasks from lecture 5, and we will be here to try to help you answer any questions about them. But first, let's jump straight into the quiz. And today there were 94 of you who answered the quiz, and that is roughly 68%. And you on average got 77% correct answers, and it took you roughly 14 minutes to complete the quiz. And as I mentioned on the last lecture, the quizzes are a good gauge to see if you have understood this week's topic. So even if you're not interested in the 2 extra points for examination 1, it might be a good idea to do the quiz. And let me just have a look here. And if you look at the individual quiz tasks, the first one where you were to print the numbers 1 to 10 on the screen, this was the task where I think most of you did sloppy mistakes, because I saw a lot of answers where you answered 1 to 10 or 1 to 11. But if you read the code, you could see in the print statement that we had I plus 1. So we printed the number from the loop plus 1, meaning that the correct answer was 0 to 10. And just be careful when you read code so you don't make assumption of what's going to happen. I think this is something that we all do. We just assume, all right, it says it should be from 1 to 10. So then the loop or the range should start from 1 and go to 11. But if we then read the code, we could see that it should actually be 0 to 10 because there's plus 1. So this is probably where most of the silly mistakes were made on that task. And we could also see that there was a tendency to get lower points for this quiz. And it is roughly here in the course this week, or maybe the next week, where it starts to get a little bit trickier. So I would just like to remind you that you should study full time. So if you have noticed that you are not studying full time, 40 hours a week, or if it seems like everything is getting a little bit trickier, then this is just a reminder to focus on your studies. And if there is one of the questions that maybe caused the most problems, it was the one where the last question where we had a nested for loop. So I thought that we could look at that one together in Visual Studio Code. And so what we're going to do in this small example, which is kind of the example that we had in the last task from the quiz, is that we are going to do the following. The goal is to produce 2 rows where each row contains 5 x's. And then we have an example here for how it should look. So this is our goal. This is what we're going to try to accomplish here. And I will do it step by step so we see that, see what happens. So we know that we're working with loops. So let's try to create a loop and start by printing 5 x's. And if we run this code, let's see what happens. We can see that we get 5 x's, but they're each on individual lines. So somehow we have to figure out how to get them on one line. We can do something like this. We say that, all right, after printing the x, make sure you don't add a new line after each print, meaning that we will print them all on one line. And I will, as we now have seen here, we have printed 5 in one row or in one line. But what we have actually done is that we have printed 1 x in each column of this row. So I will replace the variable here to column to reflect that what we are doing is that we are printing something in each column. And now that we have the columns, what if we try to write 2 rows of this? And if we try to run it, we can see that, all right, we now get a lot more x's, but they're still on the same row. So even if I said that I want to do it for 2 rows here, it's still on the same line. So how do we fix this? Well, after each row or each line that I've printed with this inner loop here, what I want to do is just make sure that I switch to the next line. And if we try to run it again, we can see that, all right, now we get what we are looking for. And we saw what we did first was that we printed 1 row. And this is probably where the confusion sets in, because we are printing 1 row, but it is actually the columns in that row that we are printing. And then if we want several rows, we have to have an outer loop for that. So the inner loop is for each column in 1 row, and the outer loop is for several rows. So we are kind of repeating what we did with the first row several times over. And if we print, I see that there is a question here, if we inserted a \n here instead of, I guess, doing this, if that would have worked. And we can see that what happens now is that we get each x on its individual line. So each time that we print the x, we also print a new line. So if we have this one here, it is the same as removing this part. So the reason that we added this part here is so that we don't switch the line after each x. We only want to switch the line after we have printed the complete row, or after we have completed the inner loop. So something to remember here when we have nested loops, that the inner one is for handling 1 line and the outer one is to repeat that line several times. And there was a question about if or it should be \n, so not /n, but it should be a \n. And yes, that means switch to the next line. And you can use that whenever you have a string that you want to print. All right, any questions about this little piece of code here, the nested loops? I think this is something that it's a good idea to practice, because it is a little bit tricky with nested loops to begin with. So don't be alarmed if it seems a little bit tricky, because it usually is in the beginning, and you just have to practice it a little bit. Before we jump into the examples, I just want to mention something about acronyms. There are a lot of acronyms in programming, and one of the probably most well-known ones or the most used ones is DRY. Don't repeat yourself. And in short, it is about we should try to avoid having the same code snippets or the same code snippet in several places in our code. So we should avoid copying a piece of code and having it in several places if we want something to happen several times. And why is this so bad to copy your code and having it in several places? Well, it leads to programs having more code, being longer, and it becomes trickier to read the code. It takes more time to read the code. And the more lines of code that we have, the more places there are for the bugs to hide. So we should try to not do it. And it's also easy if we have a piece of code that we have copied to several places. If there is something that we need to change in that code, it is easy that we change it in one place but forget it to change it in another place. And that leads to bugs that are sometimes very hard to find because it only happens at some times. It doesn't always happen. It only happens if you do something specific in your code. So we should try to avoid that. And we did this in one of the tasks that we had the other day. I don't remember if it was one of the tasks from the lectures or from the exercise where we had a bank account. And then in the very last task, we said, now do it for 2 persons. And we copied that code so we could handle a second person. We will see throughout the course that we can solve this without copying the code. And the first step to solving it is to introduce loops. And we will see later in the course that we have some other concepts that we will use too to avoid doing this copying of code. But the first step, as I said, is to introduce loops. All right. And I think what we will do is that we will look at our first example for today, and I will share that if I can find it here. Hopefully you can now see that example. And as you can see, I have also created a flowchart for it. So we have the task and then we have the flowchart. And what my idea here is that I will give you guys a few minutes to read the task and read the flowchart. So we are going to practice too, or well, you are going to practice reading a flowchart and making sure that you understand how that correlates to the text. And so after a few minutes, I'll just check the chat here. All right, I see Niklas answering something. All right, so I'll give you a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, to read it and try to read the flowchart too. And then after that, I will be back and we will take a look at it together and we will try to implement that in code. But for now, read the text, read the flowchart, and try to see how they match. And I will be back in a few minutes. I can zoom in on the task a little bit. I think so. First we have the task. I'll zoom in on the flowchart in a second. I'll just zoom in on the task first. Let's see if we can scroll down a little bit and see. We cannot quite see everything. Maybe if I zoom out a little bit. No! All right, we zoom in again. Sorry. I will scroll down to, do you want me to keep it zoomed in on the task, or should I scroll down to the flowchart? All right, you can zoom in on your screens. That is good. The flowchart. All right, I'll scroll down to the flowchart for now. We'll see. There we have the flowchart. And while you look at the flowchart, there was a question before about the report, and I will read the reports that you upload for task 1 after the deadline. So after the deadline, I will read the reports, and then I will also mark them as pass or fail. Do you want more time to look at the task and the flowchart, or should we continue? Is there anyone who wants more time? We are not in a hurry, so if you want more time, just write it in the chat, and we'll leave it here for some more time. Or should I continue? Do you guys have any questions about the task or the flowchart? I see that there is a question about the report. So you have to pass the report to pass the task. So that means that if the report does not pass, then you have to hand it in again. So you don't get partial credit for solving the script. You must pass both the script and the report. All right. I think we will continue. And as we can see up here, the script says, or the task says that we shall create a menu, and there are 3 options. And that is what we also have here in the task. Or in the flowchart, sorry. That is also what we have here in the flowchart. And I will stop sharing it if we can see it there. All right, I will try to set it up on my screen so that we can see both the flowchart, even if it is small, and we can see Visual Studio Code, and then I'll share it with you guys. Give me a second here. It will probably be a little bit small, as we're going to try to see both of them at the same time. But as you have read it already, I think that we can try to do what it says. And I will read out what it says too. So, all right. Now that we're going to try to do this, what we are going to try to use a condition control loop. And in Python, that is the while loop. And for this type of loop, we can see that we usually use Sentinel values. And in this case, it is the keep going variable that we will use as a Sentinel value to know when we should exit the loop. And if I'm going to try to write this code here, we can see that the first thing that we are doing is that this keep going is equal to true. So that is what I will add as my first step. And if we look to the right, we see keep going, and then we have our loop starting here. As long as this is true, we are going to display a menu, read something from the user, and then depending on what the user inputs, we have 3 different things that we want to do. But let's start with the loop first. we can say while we want to keep going, so we are using our sentinel value, and then we want to display the menu. So if we have it here in the loop, it will be printed each time or each iteration in the loop. So let's see if we can print this menu. And we had one display hello message, and then we had 2, which was calculate A plus B, and we also had the last option, which was 9, and that was exit. So here we have displayed our menu. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Then maybe we can do like this, and it will probably be a little bit easier to read. We don't need that much space for our code. And we can move this over here. Hopefully it's a little bit clearer. We have our menu, but I think what I will do is that I will add the following. As I know that we will be iterating here many times, and just to make a clear distinction where the new iteration is, where we show the menu again, I add a dividing line so that it becomes visually clear that now we're in the menu again. So we displayed the menu. It's time for the user input, and we can do something like this. Choice is equal to input, and here we can have select 1, 2, or 9. And here we have our if statement. So we can see that, all right, first we check if we want to display the message, that is 1. Then we check if we want to make a calculation, that is 2, or 9 to end the loop. And if we want to display the message, we display the message. Otherwise, if we're going to make a calculation, we have a few more steps to go here. All right, but let's start with an if statement to check if choice is equal to 1. And remember, when we read something from the user, it comes in as a string by default. Here we had a message to print, and I think it was hello all. So that was this branch. And we can see that it goes back up in the loop again. The second option here is to make the calculation. So I can say else if choice is equal to 2. What should we do then? Well, we should display the instructions. So we will have a print statement displaying some instructions. We will calculate A plus B, but first enter A and B. And it disappears a little bit around the corner here, but we'll do like this. And see that the next step here is to read A and B from the user. A is equal to, and this time we want it as a number. So we have input. So we have to tell Python that I want this to be a number. And we read B. And if you have any questions while I write the code, just write them in the chat and Niklas will answer them. Now that we have read them, all right, next step is to calculate the sum. Sum is equal to A plus B. And finally, we should display the sum. Then we are finished with whatever we should do when we do the calculation. So we have read the information from the user, we have calculated it, and now the only thing that's left to do is to print it. And we'll print A plus B is equal to, and then we'll print sum. And I'll also add, I think I'll add a new line. I saw that there was a question about this in the chat before, and we can add a new line here. We have a string that we're printing, so we can add a new line here. Then it will add one extra empty line. All right, and we see that after having displayed the sum, we follow the arrows and we are done here. We go back in the loop. But we have one more thing to do. If we're not displaying the message, we're not making the calculation, we should also check if we should end the loop. So we have one more thing to do here, and that is elif choice is equal to, I think it was 9. That was exit. And if it is 9, we want to exit this loop. And how should we do that? Well, if we set this variable to false, when we get back in that loop, this will be false and we will exit. So we say keep going is equal to false. Now we have written a lot of code here without trying to run it. So it's going to be exciting to see if we run it, what will happen. Right, we're displaying the menu, so far so good. What happens if we try to display a hello message? We see that it displays that message, and here that divider comes in. Now it becomes clear that we are back in the menu again. So what if I try the second option then, to calculate A plus B? You see here, all right, we will calculate A plus B, but first enter A and B. And why not 10 and 20? 10 plus 20 is equal to 30. And if we try the last option here, 9, we exit the loop. So we see that we stay in the loop for as long as we don't exit or choose to exit using 9. If I hide it and we can see the code, and even if we hide a little bit of the code here, of the string that we're printing. Now that you see both the flowchart and the code, is there anyone who have any questions about the while loop or about the code? So you can end an if statement with just elifs. So you don't have to have an else. So we can have it like we have it here, where we have if, elif, elif, and no else. And as Vibeke says here, we could have an else that gives an error message if the user inputs a wrong choice. There was nothing mentioned about it in the task, so I didn't add it, but we could have an else saying invalid option, please select 1, 2, or 9. And we could, there is someone asking if we could use a break instead, and we could, but as we have this sentinel value keep going, it makes more sense to set it to false. And one reason that you might want to do this is that there might be several places where you have a condition where you want to exit the loop, and instead of just breaking out of it, if you have a sentinel value, it's easier to search in your code for that sentinel value. Yeah, and in this case, why I choose to have it as 1 here as a string is because we read it here as a string, and we are not actually making any calculations with that number. So I'm just treating it as a string. But if we want to treat a value as a number so that we can make calculations with it, then we must make it into a number like we did here, for example. But in this case, I'm just treating it as any string. All right, and if there should be any more questions, just that I haven't seen them here, just let us know. I think what we will do is I will try to just find my way here in my papers. And if there are no more questions, I think what we will do is that we will just jump straight into the second example. So give me a second here. I'll stop sharing and then I will show you guys the second example. Hopefully it should be visible so that you can see it. And I will do the same here. Take a few minutes to read the task and look at the flow chart. And then we will do the same after that. We will talk about it and see if you have any questions, and then we will implement it too. So I will turn off my camera for 1 second and I will be back in a few minutes. Vibecca, I see your question here about empty functions with no code. Usually you don't want that, but it can happen that during the development you just want to add a function and then you can write pass in it just to get it in your code, and then you will fill it out with code later. Oh, I see Niklas is answering now too. Have you read the second task, or do you want more time to look at the task and the flowchart, or should we continue? Yes, Rebecca. In this case, it means that it should say enter number 1, enter number 2, enter number 3. So it shouldn't display the number that they input, but it should say that, all right, please enter number 1, please enter number 2, please enter number 3. All right, and the question that was here in the chat was actually a really good one, because if we look at the text, it says each time indicating to the user what number is being read. What does that actually mean? It's a little bit unclear by design, so that we have to think about what does it actually mean. And if we don't know, we can ask whoever wrote the task, just as someone did in the chat here, or we can make an assumption. And in this case, the meaning is, as I said a second ago, that we should state that we are reading number 1, number 2, and number 3. And as I constructed the task, that I know that is what we want, but otherwise, we can make an assumption and write that assumption down so that we and anyone in the future knows that that is the assumption that we made. Given this text, I made the assumption that that is what it means. Because if we need to change it in the future, and maybe it's not me who's going to change it, it's someone else, then it might be good to know what assumptions I made when writing the code. But all right. So we have this task and you guys have looked at it for a little bit. I will stop sharing it and I will show it in a second again. I will just move it around on the screen. Let's see if we can show all of it. I think it's going to be a little bit easier with this one than it was with the previous one, as it's not so wide. So if I now share my screen, you guys should see both of them. And so what we're going to look at in this example is a count control loop, and in Python that is the for loop. And we use this kind of loop when we beforehand, before the loop starts, knows how many times we want to iterate. So before the loop starts, we need to know how many times we want to iterate. And we're going to use the same project here to write the code. I'll just delete what we had since before. But before I start to implement it according to this description here, I'm actually gonna write a little bit of code for a solution that doesn't use a loop. So give me 1 second here. I will write a few lines of code and then I will come back and talk about those lines of code. Oh, oops. I wrote the script and now I try to run it. And as soon as I run it, I see that I made a mistake here. I made a spelling mistake. So now I want to go back and change it. But as I have copied the code, we see that we have it in 3 places here where I have to change it. And this is what I was talking about before, that we should try to avoid duplicating code. Because imagine now that I only change it in 2 places here. I forget to change it here. Then we still have this spelling mistake in our code. So when we run it the 3rd time, it will show this spelling mistake. In this case, it's easy to see it because it's just these 3 lines, one after the other, so it's easy to see that we have to change all of them. But imagine that we have more code and maybe it's a calculation that we're making in several places. Then it's harder to see it right away if we have missed one of the places. So just to illustrate that we should try to avoid duplicating code. And we have a nice plan for how to do that here on the right. So instead of having this code, let's try to follow our plan here on the right. So I will say that total sum is equal to 0. We see that that is the first step of what we should do. And then it's time to see if there are more numbers in a list of numbers. All right, so it's some form of loop, and we will use the for loop here. Or maybe a better name would be number. Number in the list of numbers, which is 1, 2, and 3. What should we do? If there are more numbers, we should input the numbers. Or maybe I should say index here. Index is better. Because then I can use number for the thing that we're reading from the user. And I say input number, and then we use index here. Total sum plus equals number, which is add the red number to the total sum. So, all right, we read a number from the user in this step here, and then we add that to our accumulator total sum here. And the last step, we see here that, all right, we set this to 0. I or our accumulator up here, then it's time for our loop. And as long as there are more numbers in our list, we will go into the loop and we will say that, all right, input a number. We're doing that here. We're reading something in this step, and then we are adding whatever we read to total sum. Then the loop finishes, so we go back here and do that over and over again until it falls. So when we exit the loop, we should display the total sum. So after the loop here, what I want to do is print the total sum is total sum. All right, we see that, all right, that was the last step. So when the loop has finished, we go out and continue after the loop and print that the total sum is whatever we have calculated in total sum here. So if we try to run it, we can see what happens. All right, input number 1, and we get number 1 here because we're using index, which is picking the numbers from this list and assigning them to our target variable index. And then we're using index in here. So the first time in the loop, our target variable index will have the value 1, as we can see down here, and maybe I input 10. Next time index, our target variable, will get the next number from the list, 2. So we see that it prints 2 here. And 20. And the final time for the final number in the list is 3, and we see that here. And we can see what it did was that it added 10, 20, and 30 together, and we got the sum 60. Is there anyone who have any questions so far for this example? I don't see anything in the chat. Because I was thinking that maybe we can change this example a little bit. I will modify it to use a range instead. Because list is something that we will cover a little bit later in the course. So we will get back to lists. But there is another way of solving this using the built-in function range. And we can say that, all right, I want to loop in the range of 1 to 4. And here, the first number is inclusive, meaning it will print 1. And the last number, 4, is exclusive, meaning that this number will not be included. So if we write 1 and 4, it means that the numbers will, for index in this loop, will be 1, 2, and 3. And if we can run it again, I'll just run it here again. And you see that it prints 1, 2, and 3. So it works exactly the same. It is just that we have changed our list to range instead. So that is another way that you can solve it. And the reason I used a list for this example, that we started with the list, is that they covered it in the book. So that is how they started with it, to having a list with the numbers. And then I wanted to show range too. They used that one too. And in many cases, range is nice to know about. Because if we go back to what we had with the list here, imagine that I want to read 100 numbers. Then I would have to keep going here, writing 5, 6, 7, and so on. But if we use range instead, and I want to read 100 numbers, I can do something like this. Then I would read 100 numbers instead. Yes, so the list would only contain the values 1, 2, 3. All right, so this was another example of when we have a flowchart already created for our task, how do we implement that in code? Any other questions? I see that you guys are discussing range and list. Are there any other questions? Just let us know in the chat. If not, we will continue. And there is a similar example in the book where they also let the user decide on how many iterations in the loop we should go. So if you haven't looked at that already, I do recommend you to read that example. And there is one more thing I would like to mention. Even if I've talked for a little bit longer today, there is one more thing. And that is that I want to remind you guys that in the end of this week, we have the deadline for uploading our first part of examination 1, the one called task 1. And for that one, there are 3 problems that you can choose from. And you can choose to do 1, 2, or 3 of those, but remember that you have to solve at least one of them. And if you feel that you don't have enough time to finish it before the deadline, there will be 2 more chances to upload for this part of examination later on. If you go to the study guide, you will see the dates of those re-examinations in there. So if you feel that it's not enough time to finish it to the end of the week, there are 2 more opportunities later on. And the reason I mention this is because I want you guys to be honest with yourself, so that you can plan for the re-examinations if you don't have time now. Don't fall into the trap of cheating and trying to upload the code of someone else. You will only trick yourself, you will cheat yourself, because in the end it's you who will suffer from this, because later on me and other teachers will expect of you to know what we are covering now. So if you try to cheat now, it will come back and bite you later when you are expected to know this that we're covering now. But also, of course, there will be a manual check and there will be an automatic tool checking for plagiarism. So if you are trying to mislead the examining teacher, you will be reported to the discipline board and potentially being suspended if you're sentenced there. So don't cheat. Instead, plan for doing it at the re-examination if you feel that there is not enough time now.